You ready?
We're ready.
Okay. Good morning. I'd like to call to order the continued special board meeting today, Wednesday, June 28th. Let's see. How about Eric? How about if you lead us in the pledge today?
Allegiance.
Indivisible.
Test, 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 test. Test, 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 testing, testing. Okay. Need some more? Test, test, test. Test, 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 testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Jesse, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. We good?
Was that you just now?
No, that was not me just now. No,
Okay, okay.
we're good? Okay. All right, good morning and welcome to the Tuolumne Utilities District Board meeting. This morning, we are continuing the June 14th, 2023 public hearing to consider the proposed water and sewer rate increase. The notice of the public hearing was mailed to all parcel owners of record served by the Tuolumne Utilities District on April 27th, 2023, and published twice in the Union Democrat on May 31st and June 7th, 2023. The notice of hearing and the proof of publication are in the district files. The board held the public hearing on June 14th, 2023. During the June 14th, 2023 meeting, the board opened the hearing and received public comments on the proposed rate increase. After hearing from everyone who wanted to speak, the board closed the public comment portion of the public hearing and counted the protest votes. Neither the water rate increase nor the sewer rate increase received majority protest votes, which meant the board could adopt the new rates as proposed. However, after much discussion, the board was unable to agree on the rate structure and asked staff to come back with some alternative rate structures for the board to consider at today's June 28th, 2023 meeting. The board then continued the June 14th meeting to today's June 28th meeting. The purposes of today's meeting will be to first, hear staff's alternative rate structures, and second, hold a board vote on one of those structures. The public comment portion of this hearing was closed on June 14th, but because we recognize that people may still wish to comment on the proposed rate increases, those people who wish to comment on the proposed water and sewer rate increases will be asked to speak during the public forum portion of this meeting. Once the public forum closes, the board will go directly into a discussion on the alternative rate structures. To ensure everyone who wishes to provide comment has the opportunity to do so, each member of the public that wishes to speak may be limited to 3 minutes or less, depending on the number of persons wishing to speak. Who's going to speak today? Raise your hand, please. I see 2, 3. Okay. And then whoever's on the online as well. Okay. Then we will go ahead and open the public forum. So who would like to speak? Come on up to the podium, state your name, and give us your comments.
Hi, I'm Patricia Walker, and I'm standing in for my sisters who are the owners of two properties of on Nevada Street. Anyway, so I'm currently staying there right now, and my sisters are just out of town. So anyway, so put my input in, and so I just had a suggestion as far as considering different people's situations as as it goes on about their ability to pay, or if different changes come along, like our families, people pass on, and then the burden shifts for the payment, because there's like, we're sisters. And we do different shares about what's being paid on the property there. I've only been here back to California for 13 years, but I'm making a contribution. And as far as mine goes, it's like, we've got 2 widows now that are, well, one of the owners is a widow, and I'm a widow. But as far as life things changes, my suggestion was just to, if they have some things in place with the TUD for different family situations, to be considerate of any sliding scales or anything like that they might have for those situations. So that was one of my recommendations that I've been thinking on, because personally myself, because I've been actually paying 2 water bills, just because I chose to do one voluntarily. The other one was because I promised my sister I'd pay the utilities where I'm staying. And we have 2 homes on they each have a TUD, but well, normally our usage isn't really that much, except for in summer when we water our yard. We have grapevines and trees to water. So that's the biggest thing, because we don't really have a big family and children to support. So the other thing was like, I had compassion for people that have don't live in their places full time, because they have like cabins in the snow, and that they might be some kind of thing that you might consider for people that aren't full-time residents. And the basic rate, I've talked to people and they said, that's pretty good. Your basic rate is good, price. So I guess that was just me. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention those things, and I want to say thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sally McClellan. I live in Willow Springs. I've never been to one of these meetings, never spoken up, but I've been following what's been going on with proposed rate increases. And I just wanted to say that my experience in living in this county, the prohibitive costs are propane, water in the summer, and fire insurance. And so I just really want to speak up against sudden, steep increases in water. It would change how I live, what the outside of my house looks like. And believe me, I'm not somebody that uses a lot of water. My front yard is mulch, but I do have drought resistant plants in the back. I have some poplars that I want to keep alive. So I just want you to be really considerate of people who are trying, but have other huge bills and just can't take a rate increase that I've heard has been proposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. My name's Alicia Enzi. I live out on Jacksonville at the end of the Aldrin ditch. Mark's not here. He's across the stage right now. Anyways, we're a raw water customer. And I finally got the numbers back from him this morning early. Over the last 5 years, we have paid a 366% increase. This 28%, 25% even raise in our water rates is going to bring us up $600 a year. So I feel for the people that have to pay the $14 a month. But the impact on the raw water customers is phenomenal. I would really like you guys to keep that into consideration. And another little incident we had last week, I just want to share with you guys. I know the TUD system was put in originally for all the communities in the outlying areas, like Aldrin used to be a French camp. And this ditch was built and constructed to fight fires throughout the county. We had a fire on Harney last week that was 1.5 miles from my house. We have 2 fire hydrants on our property. One down by the big pond and one in between the barn and the house. And the ditch water was cut off and redirected to go down Curtis Creek and coming out the end. And all of a sudden we didn't have water. We had our 1 inch coming. It's just suddenly it was gone. And here we're down there irrigating like there's nothing happening. Those water tenders had to drive all the way to Stent to reload their water when I could have just said, come on to my house. I didn't have any water to give them. So for $600 a year, I mean, really like to see something improve here. It's fair to everybody. I understand that you guys need your money to do your things, but also in the last meeting, they mentioned maybe constructing, checking out and streamlining, make your money worth where you're spending it, make it worthwhile. If we're going to be paying for it, at least let's see some good results. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wasn't gonna talk, but I just try to remind a few. David Peters lived up here since 1954, when before some of the rocks were dirt. So know everybody and just about everything. One of my problems is I've not heard a word in the previous set of increases, the meeting or this meeting, about what could be done to cut costs. Not a single word. Now, maybe I'm sure you guys have been working on it, but the public needs to hear how you guys are trying to cut costs, because just increasing not a good idea. Yesterday, I went to Walmart to get one medication out of my 9 heart medication. $2,000 for a 3-month supply. One pill. Fortunately, I have decent insurance, but a lot of people don't. In the old days, when I was a kid, I used to hear the old people talking about, well, I'm on Social Security and I can't afford to eat because of all the cost of living. So they'd eat dog food. Used to come in big cans, used to be cheap, 15, 20 cents a can. They'd eat dog food. Now dog food costs more than people food does. We don't have any options. Like all this stuff keeps going up, we're just toast. It's just like, oh, well, just raise it. But I know that you guys are in a hard place. You've been put in a hard place by not knowing about not being able to increase it in the future years. That's wrong. I should have known that. Should have been told that you didn't increase the next years, because it puts you in a harder place. But especially with the raw water people, there are not that many of them out there. And we don't have many businesses left in the county. We keep running them out of business by increasing prices of water. Then we're going to be down the road looking back going, gee, wonder why all the businesses left Walton County. Just like California saying, gee, I wonder why all these people are leaving California. Well, duh. I mean, we're being taxed out of existence. So I would just recommend strongly that you guys just want to do a half on the first year and revisit it next year or the year after that, fine. But please don't kill us off. We're almost dead on it.
Thank you. Anybody else here? Nathan.
I am Nathan Rosasco, and I spoke to you last week or 2 weeks ago as the representative of the Farm Bureau. I'm going to speak for myself today. My family's been a user of the raw water for years. Here about 10 years ago, we used to have around 7-inch contract. I upped it to 15. I bought in, paid over $3,000. The miner's inch, 3,100 something. Get in, we bought 8 inches to get us up to 15 for security reasons, figuring that Wasn't sure about the reclaimed water, how that was gonna go. I use a lot of reclaimed water. I actually, myself and John Gardell use more reclaimed water than you guys sell as raw water. So we're large users in that, but I also, one of the ranches I use either well water or ditch water. In that process, I had no idea that we were gonna jump to a year-round fixed service for that. So I went from paying 6 months as we drew water on a fixed rate, to now I pay year-round. So 6 months out of the year, my 10 inches is $754 every 2 months for no water. I know this is going to maintain the ditches, and I laughed the other day, I was thinking about this. I'm starting to age myself. I've met with at least 7 or 8 general managers, starting with Malcolm Crawford, Jim McCully, going through this thing. We negotiated to get that price down to a little over $3,000 to buy that water. So now we're faced with this situation. I have to make a decision. You keep raising this service charge up, and that's what you're doing. You're raising the service charge. You're not. The cost of water in 2015 doubled. The service charge went up almost 265%. And on top of that 265%, even if you give us the break and go 24 over 5 years, think about what that is going to be like on my service charges all winter long. Okay, it's a significant income. The thing that bothers me about 218, and look, when I saw this come through, I contacted California Farm Bureau's legal counsel. They'd already lost this battle in Imperial County. They tried to separate raw water and domestic water, and they lost. They told me, you're kind of on your own, you guys, because we can't afford to go for another battle. I don't think we can win it. This is unfair to be putting these two classifications of water. The only thing that's actually the same is the ditch flow, that you pull your water out of the ditch. In other words, you have to have the ditches to get your treated water. We have to have the ditches for the domestic. I question the CPI that you guys are being led down the road, that we got all this money we have to spend. How much of it is being spent on the actual ditches? I'm hearing about water tanks, pipelines, all kinds of things. I'm sure there'll be some ditch maintenance done, but it's got to be somewhere along the line. And when you bunch these together, we have no option. We're stuck with you guys raising both rates at the same time. And I've already explained how much we've already paid off and what it's going to do to us. And I'm afraid, like she's talking about, I'm going to leave you just as this. Water is fire protection. Green zones stop fires. And when you keep decreasing the amount of water sales, you're going to make it a higher risk for fires. One thing these ditches do is create zones where you can have fire protection. So I ask you to look through this and take it really serious, because when you raise these rates, you're going to affect not just raw water, but your domestic customers too. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Jesse.
Morning, Jesse Cover. Wasn't sure I was going to speak, but a lot of thoughts running through my head since last 2 weeks. Prior to that, trying to do this thing, and I know that's nothing new to you folks. I echo what Nathan said there. You know, we bought the ranch there, Cover's Apple Ranch, in '98, and we inherited a 30 miners inch contract, which, you know, we thought was pretty neat, and it has been. But when that rate increase on the base rate increased and went from 6 months to 12 months, like Nathan was outlining, I'm in the same boat as him, except I've got twice the base rate that he has. And I don't use all that water. I've got some future plans. The district even approached me about, you know, why don't you turn some of those inches back in? Well, that's kind of like selling land. There's just certain things you don't want to do. And so we're not interested in letting go any of that water, but it really puts us in a bind as we, you know, we're not ready to expand to where we need that water this year. But, you know, so I think anybody that looks at it can understand the bind that puts us in. Where all of a sudden that water got really expensive on standby. It changed majorly from where it had been. So nothing new. I know you know this stuff, but if I don't stand up here and tell you my situation, you won't understand it. You won't know it. So shame on me if I don't say it. But I echo what's been said. I don't see the way through it. I don't know how we can do it. But if there was any way, I got to believe there's a way that we can relook at raw water and make it work for everybody. Because it's way more than just, oh, Covers or Rosasco's got a big chunk of water. I think we need to look at it different than that. There's benefit to the entire county for those of us that have raw water and are using it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Who's next? Anybody else? Okay, Corey, how about on online? Anybody?
That's indicating.
Okay, last call. Who does?
My bad. Nobody at the moment.
Okay, last call. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the public forum then. Okay. We're going to do a little staff presentation, I understand. Steve?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Melissa, will you read the next item, please? I apologize for skipping you.
No worries. Item number 1 for regular business, continuation of the June 14th, 2023 public hearing to consider adoption of revised water and sewer rates for the period of August 1st, 2023 through July 1st, 2027, and approval of the final draft rate study for fiscal year 2024 through 2020.
Okay, Steve.
Part-
Excuse me. Barbara has a question here. Director Balin?
Yeah, I'll make it quick. So as I understand it, we just had a public forum. Was that supposed to be for items unrelated to what we're just now going to discuss? Because I don't want to foreclose on the public's option to comment. Have we just closed?
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
The public comment for the rate increase was closed at the last meeting. So, and it remains closed. However, every meeting has a public forum, as you're aware, and that's what we just closed. So this was the time for them to come up and speak about rates. But the actual comment period for the rate increase was closed last meeting, and it's not going to be opened.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
More or less, but so in other words, for public comment, it's fine for the public to comment on what we're going to be discussing.
I do not believe so, but Jesse, can you clarify that?
Yes, thank you, Director Balin. Yes, the public forum in this particular situation, because it was requested at the last meeting that because this meeting or this hearing was going to be continued, that the public who perhaps were unable to attend the first hearing would still have the opportunity to comment on the continued hearing. And so that is what we just accomplished. Under the public forum, the public can speak about anything on the agenda or not on the agenda. It has been common practice for TUD to limit public comment to items not already on the agenda, because the way we typically do it is the board president will solicit a comments on each individual item as they go through them on the agenda. But in this situation, because the public comment portion of the hearing was closed last month, we simply decided to do both types of comment, whether it's related to the agenda or not, during today's public forum. So everybody had a chance to speak today.
Thank you.
Okay. Director Boatright.
Jesse, with Steve's about to present us with new information. That doesn't the public won't be able to comment on that. Is that correct?
The public hearing portion, the issue that was before the board at the prior meeting was the rate study and the rates as proposed. And ultimately what has happened, and during that time period, the public was able to comment on the rate study and the proposed rates. In this situation, what we have are simply proposals that were offered by the board that during the meeting 2 weeks ago, that is simply a continuation of the hearing that was held last week. And the way we did it 2 weeks ago was simply the board had public comment, the board had a discussion, and the board held numerous motions or made numerous motions, none of which passed. And really the way to look at today's hearing or a continued hearing is merely a continuation of what was concluded 2 weeks ago.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Steve.
Morning, Steve Sheffield, your finance director. To lead off with this, again, Jesse, thank you for the clarification. 2 weeks ago was the Prop 218 public hearing to consider adoption of the rates. As Jesse mentioned, we went through the public hearing. We took comments. The board had a variety of questions, suggestions, and nothing was agreed to at that time. It was suggested and scheduled to bring back to a subsequent special meeting today to further discuss what the board asked and did. Obvious interest to the public was to make this meeting solely about this discussion, solely about consideration of adoption of the rates, and to provide first and foremost, the public continue to provide input. Some of the options are limited, as we discussed last week, as far as subsequent years or 2 weeks ago. Subsequent years, changing methodology, excluding classes of customers. I mean, all those things have to be considered. So to start today, I think you're going to get kind of a brief update from me. I'd like to lead off with Jesse on that. And then Dawn's going to contribute as well on this. Then if you would bear with us, I think what would be best is let us get through the information we have, and then we can open up for discussion, because that's really where it's going to come down to. And I think all the information is important. So just to summarize in here, that when we started this process almost a year ago, the board directed staff to prepare a rate proposal based on a rate study and to prepare it internally to save expense, to cut costs to the ratepayers, significant costs. Staff took that, provided the board with the best possible solution for all concerned, all customers, all classes, everything there. And the board directed the staff to proceed with the proposed increase. At the public hearing 2 weeks ago, the board majority directed staff to return with a lesser increase, is what we heard. So with that being said, I think important here, let me see if hopefully it switches over. Yep. So what you have on your screen now is what went out in the actual rate proposal. These are the rates broken down by treated, raw MID, and sewer. Jesse, if you would now, could you address our conversation as far as what options the board has related to this proposed increase?
Yes, thank you, Steve. I'm Jesse Barton, obviously TUD's general counsel. And so to quickly summarize what we have done here, I've had numerous conversations with Steve and Don over the previous 2 weeks. And at the conclusion of the board hearing 2 weeks ago, it was clear that the board was uncomfortable with the initial rate hike, the first rate hike of 28% in the first year for the water. And the board asked staff to go back. Well, ultimately, during the meeting, the board expressed numerous alternatives. Could we perhaps do this? Could we perhaps do that? And it's very difficult it was very difficult during that meeting to be able to respond to those alternative proposals that I certainly had not had time to think about or talk to Steve about. And so what ended up happening was the board asked staff to go back and prepare some proposals for the board to consider, where the initial increase would be something less than 28%. And so after taking a look at what was sent out, and the notice, I took a look at the notice because there was some confusion at the previous meeting about percentages or dollars, which was going to be cut and how would that affect subsequent years. If the first year wasn't going to be 28%, what would the second year look like? And these are all very important legal questions. What Steve proposed last 2 weeks ago was consistent with Prop 218, and you essentially follow a formula under Prop 218 to adopt new rates. And ultimately what the board was asking for, the alternatives were slight deviations, and you can deviate from Prop 218. The most important deviation that can occur is because these rates were sent out, the board has the ability to adopt rates less than this, okay, but not more. But you have to be careful in how you do that. You have to be careful because what Steve has prepared here, if we look at that first line for treated water monthly, 1 inch or less, and we look at the current price of $64.50, the 28% increase would be $82.54. That represents the first rate hike of 28%. Now, the board can adopt something less that results in less than $82.54. It cannot adopt something more. Now, in the subsequent year, 7/1/2024, that is to go into effect 7/1/2024, let's say, for example, the board decides to remove, let's stick with even numbers here, $2 off of the $82.54 in the first year. So the first year would only be $80.54. In 2024, the board cannot add that $2 to the $84.69. It can adopt $84.69 because that represents the cost of service beginning on July 1, 2024. But you cannot recover the $2 that you left on the table in the first year. And so the impact can be cumulative over a period of years, depending on how the board structures the rate hike. And so that was something that needed to be worked out, and we did work it out over the previous 2 weeks. So what Steve Don and I have prepared, we're going to have 2 proposals for you, both of which are consistent with Prop 218, and both of which are consistent with board direction at the last meeting. One of the proposals will only cut the first year, so it will go down from 28% to a different percentage, and then Steve will outline the impacts to the budget, TUD budget, as a result of the reduction of the first year, whereas Steve has also prepared a second alternative where the first year and each subsequent year will also be reduced, but ultimately still less than the cost of service over each of the 5 years. And you will see that the impact of reducing it through each year is going to be cumulative and more significant than if it were just cut in the first year. We were unsure of precisely what the board wanted, whether it was alternative A or alternative B, or perhaps something in between. So we prepared 2. And unless there are questions, or Steve, if I left anything out that you'd like me to address, I will stop presenting now.
I'll make an exception to what I said earlier. If any of the board has a question for Jesse as far as what he just mentioned, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the rest of the data and then have our discussion. Good to proceed?
Any questions? Okay, go ahead.
So I think quite a few of these folks were here at the last meeting 2 weeks ago. You know, the challenge and You know, again, I apologize if I expressed some frustration at the end of that 4.5 hour marathon. But the struggle was, I felt there was no consensus. You know, as I mentioned before, we prepared this rate analysis with the best of minds, the best options. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. We'll look at the price of gas, look at chemicals, all these costs they're talking about, we experience in making water. And, you know, what I got from the board was 2 board members seemed to understand and go along with it and agree. The other board members had differing opinions as what's right, less, more, spread it out, how to do that.
Can we move this along to the rate study instead of a speech to sway the board?
All right,
I'd like to hear what you have to say.
thank you. Appreciate the civility and the consideration. All right, I'll move along as much as I can. First of all, I'd like to do a recap. Okay, 2 weeks ago, we provided you the rate protest. 13,509 customers did not protest. Sewer rate customers, 5,703 did not protest. Both of those over 93%. Almost every one of you said the increase is too high. We've brought that out over the past 6 board meetings, workshops, everything else. Everybody knows inflation's a 40-year high. There's been no increase since January 1st, 2020. Everybody says costs have gone up. Guess what? TUD cut costs every single day, doing its job, delivering water for the past 3 years without charging anybody more money. Finally, the board previous to you in 2015 chose a lesser option, just like you're debating right now. And that cost us to cause this 28% as well. The increase at that time was even higher than 28%. So you're asking for a lesser amount the first year. Couple key points. By not adopting the recommended increase, this board's making the same mistake again. The remaining year's increases will not be sufficient. We reduce that first year. By reducing the first year, you're guaranteeing a larger increase sooner rather than the 5-year plan we had developed in there. Finally, for the record, my professional opinion as your finance director and a certified public accountant for over 40 years, I want to say for the record that not adopting the proposal is financially and fiscally irresponsible. So at this point, I think I should turn it over to Dawn, if you'd like to talk about this first option just for a minute.
No.
No?
My comment. Don't mind.
Okay. So that being the case, what we came up with, this is as original as Jesse showed. Listening to what the board heard or said 2 weeks ago, we heard cut in half. We heard 18%, 14%, $10 a month. We heard cut first 2 years of sewer. And so taking that all into account and discussing with Jesse and staff's best recommendation and hearing what the board, we felt the most appropriate option we could provide that may or may not serve the board's needs to the majority would be an 18% instead of 28% first year. And so what you have on the screen here is what the total rates would be if we do 18% the first year, and then the remaining years would be consistent with what was in the original proposal that was mailed out. The second slide we just finished is describing the actual dollar amount for the increase compared to the original proposal. So the 1 inch or less would go up $11.61 instead of the 18. The raw water would go up $6.30 instead of the $9. And then the sewer, we did not recommend changing. Just because of the significance of the operating costs, the new plant coming on board and everything. So by cutting that first year, the 18% on there, the projected deficit over the next 5 years would be $9.7 million. As I pointed out in the previous slide, it'd be $11.61 per month. The 9.7 million, the only way to make that up will be to cut CIP. There's nowhere else for that to come out. So at that point, I really think appropriate to turn over to Don to talk about CIP and the specific thing that the 9.6 million will get us.
Thank you, Steve. And before last two slides, before I get to the last two slides, I just, 2 weeks ago, many times it was mentioned that TUD should have an outside consultant perform a rate study for raw water. Although I think this would not be money well spent, we can certainly do so if we are directed to do so. My slide up yet? My 2 slides? Okay. So I wanted to talk about real life things, right? Rather than numbers, it's not real until it's real. The original rate increase as proposed, and for less than the cost of a delicious Mile High apple pie per month, just looking at 3 of the 5-year capital improvement plan for water only would address, would only address 18 tanks that are in either poor condition or needing renovation to keep good tanks good. Would consolidate 3 water treatment plants. Will result in less cost for ongoing operation and maintenance, saving future cost. Less power consumption. Will rely more on gravity feed systems. Will result in higher quality of water. That savings could go right back into future CIP projects. Other projects would lessen impacts to our infrastructure due to severe weather, PG&E public safety power shutoffs. For me personally, it's keeping our promise that we said we were going to do with the ratepayers' money back in 2015. Next slide, last slide. So for half the pie, so full pie, you can see that we're going to have to defer key projects to future years. In year 1, we'll still address 6 tanks. In year 2, we'll address 1 more tank. And in year 3, we'll address 3 more tanks. But as we go out further and further, there's just no way we're going to catch up to those 18 tanks in the time frame that we promised the customer we would. So yes, I know I heard a question, how much in here is for raw water. I just, after quick, looking at all these numbers, I think I found 4 or 5 projects over this 3-year period where we're going to be working on raw water projects. So that's what I have for you. Ready for questions, discussions?
Anybody have questions for Don or Steve or Jesse? Director Bailey.
I believe, Steve, you mentioned there were 2 alternatives.
Well, Jesse kind of went off script there to begin with, but what Jesse described originally, the approach was talking about limiting to those percentages. The original percentages was 2.6 and 2% and 1.5 and that. Those are in place on that original schedule. And so really what changed was fiscal year 25 would go to the dollar amounts they had on there rather than the 2.6. And that just further compounds what we just showed you. Essentially doesn't change the rates other than in that second year, but instead of 10 million, it now goes to an excess of $14 million deficit. So we did not go ahead at this time to do the tables. We wanted to provide that, but Jesse can provide the final word. As it stands right now, the way I see it is 2 weeks ago, the public and the board were notified of a proposed rate increase. All of those documents, all of those motions, everything else is in place if the board so chose. What we're providing today is a second table based on this 18% first year. That's what we're looking at. The board can choose to adopt that, or the board can tell us you want something different than the 18 we've proposed, or you don't want to do anything at this time. And that's kind of where I see where we're at right now. So we did not go through and do every class, every line for those additional years that Jesse talked about. It would just be slightly less those first 2 year, that first year of fiscal year 25, if that makes sense. I do have the total amount, like I said, be a $14 million projection by going to the 18. And similarly, that's why we didn't go any lower, 28 versus 21. I think President Kearns, you mentioned 21%. Someone else had cut in half. Just the sewer alone, if you cut both of those in half, that's another $7 million deficit to add to it. So now we're up to $20 million deficit. So this is what we brought, thinking with the goal and objective for the board to be able to make a decision today. And the decision options are what I just spelled out. Hope that.
Director Ringen, you had a question?
Yes, this is to Dawn. On this screen that we have before us, I don't really understand what the boxes are and the yellow on the right.
Yeah,
How's that? What are you trying to show us here?
basically, it's a duplicate of the first slide with a 28% increase, but it's illustrating to you what projects are going to get deferred into future years. Maybe that's hard to read, but whatever color that is, starting at line 112 all the way to 123, those are going to get those, 112, 113 through 121, those are going to get deferred to the fiscal year 25 versus 24. The next boxes defer what would have been done in 25 to 26. And then the next box is what would have been 26 to 27 and so forth. And it was too difficult to show you all 5 years, but it's just an illustration of what projects are going to need to get deferred to future years.
Okay, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense now. So this original list of CIP projects, they were put on there just for fun. I mean, these are things that need either replacement or repair, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no joyful projects there.
Well, how many of them are
18? Yeah, I'm going to talk about tanks. All the things on there are important, necessary or important for us to perform our daily functions. But literally, the most important thing are those darn tanks. If a pipe ruptures in downtown Sonora, it's a bad deal, but it's not the end of the world. One of the commenters last week said, the sky's not falling. No, tanks are falling. Tanks are falling. I'm trying to address 18 of the worst tanks, except for a few I'm trying to keep renovated so they don't get to the point of falling down. I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry, but yeah, I take this personal. I've been here 20 whatever and lost track now, 3 years, I suppose. I've touched every one of those tanks. I've been on top of every one of those tanks. I know the condition personally. I know the close proximity to dozens of homes. Yeah, it's personal to me. I'm going to take it personal. They're not going to come calling you. They're not going to come calling any of you. They're going to say, they're going to say, you're the general manager, buck stops with you. That's what's going to happen.
Well, as you know, when I first came on the board at the beginning of 2012, I have visited just about every bit of infrastructure that TUD has. And I know personally what poor shape much of it is in. And it wasn't stuff that TUD built, had anything to do with until TUD was formed in 1992 and was given all this garbage by the county, who bought for $1 million from PG&E, the system, which they couldn't handle. And for that $1 million, they got about probably $350 million in deferred maintenance. And now they turned it over to TUD. And we've been fighting this uphill battle ever since. So to me, as much as I said before, I hate rate increases, and I really don't like this 28% upfront. But and it's going to kill me because I'm on a very, very tight budget income. But you know, water's important, and if all these need to be done, then we need to get them done. I mean, how else is it going to get done?
Anybody else? Director Boatright?
Oh, I got quite a bit. Steve, do we have a balanced adopted budget at this point? Right now, today, before this rate increase?
You adopted that last month. Yes. This month.
Okay. Don, you know, I agree that, you know, we've got plenty of infrastructure that needs to be replaced, fixed, upgraded. Did this happen last week? That we suddenly realized this, or have we been, you know, struggling with this over time as far as we've had to work to get ourselves into this hole? You know, in my opinion, we're going to have to work to get ourselves out of it.
Absolutely. Director Boatright, you know, if I can answer, you know, as well as, if not more than I do, you've been here longer than I have. You've seen this district evolve or devolve into what we've had. You know, the question, you know, the answer to.
Do.
Now, let me just tell you though, I know most of us know, but maybe not all of us know. Y'all need to know. Beginning in 2015 and 16, we started to make, this group of people recognized the problem we had. I was pleading with my supervisors. And on the water side, we began to make some improvements because I was pleading. I told him, tanks were going to fall. They did, eventually. You got no help, on my opinion, on the sewer side. Zero. So you know full well the condition, but again, this is what I really want to say was, beginning in 2015, the then general manager, interim general manager, hired hand, some people call him, put us on solid ground, put us on a path to success. And we went from 70, I forget my stats now, 78 tanks in 2015 to 61 tanks today. We were making good on our promise. And the same, I apologize for all you sewer workers out there. I mean to say the same thing for you too. We've made some great strides in the sewer, as an example, the treatment plant that's being built. We have one less sewer lift station today than we did then. In fact, we have a really nice new law and justice sewer lift station that you hear nothing about. You don't hear the Crossroads lift station, going there 2 to 3 times a month, pulling out rags. We're making good on our promise. And we have been since 2016. I just want to continue to make good on our promise so that the next general manager, the next set of supervisor directors aren't here saying the same thing in five years or so, 10 years.
The screen that's before us right now with the 18% rate increase, it's a great illustration of what we've loaded up, what we've got as far as CIP for the water side. But it's also an illustration of time. A 5-year rate increase adopted today does not mean that the final rate increase goes into effect in 2028 on a 5-year. We're not going to reduce, August 1st or July 1st of 2028, we're not going to reduce water and sewer rates by 35.7%, which is the original proposed 5-year rate increase for the water side. A rate increase goes into perpetuity. They'll never come down. And what I said is we were going into this rate increase, 28% is too steep to ask up front. We need to balance this out, you know. Yeah, our, you know, deferred maintenance gets pushed instead of, you know, if you adopt at the first year at 14% in water and cut the first 2 years of sewer in half as far as the original percentages. I don't have time right here in this meeting to study how that means on the changes of dollars, and really that kind of muddles it. I have no way to interpret, you know, the rate increase if we're just going to go with dollars when it was originally done in percent. That's just me. I don't have enough time to do that, but it's a matter of, you know, those things are cut in half, and this rate increase is basically dropped in half. It'll take us 10 years to do what's proposed to do in 5. Does that give us more time? You know, probably gives our own crew a little bit more time to, you know, cherry pick the items that their specific skills will adapt and come out with a better project, much more cost efficient to doing that project, making it more beneficial to us. You know, and what I've heard in the public, it's just too steep. Trying to do, you know, this all at once. You know, if I were to look at my, you know, house, vehicles, equipment, I could certainly come up with a, you know, CIP, but I would like to do it all in the first couple of years. Hey, yeah, can I afford it? Director Ringen, I certainly appreciate your stance of saying, you know, stating this is a hard lift. Think about, you know, some of the people that are, you know, in your position or maybe even less advantaged of your that will have to go along with this as well too. Director Balin, you brought up raw water several times as far as, you know, having been separated. You know, if we are going to list them in the same category, you know, there's not a large percentage of these projects that I see that benefit the raw water side. You know, go ahead.
That's correct. And we're not asking them to pay for any of those. We're not asking raw water customers to pay for tanks.
If I could, David, just a couple of clarifications for what you did. You're making excellent points. Some things I think you need to understand. This was never based on percentage. By law, the way we have to do this is what are our projected costs for the next thing? Our service charges go to pay for operations and maintenance, capital improvements, debt service, and reserves. That's what the starting point is. Now, when I did it, I was afraid it was going to come out to be 100% because this hasn't been done since 2015. 28% is steep. I agree, but we designed it that way. So we could have gone into it saying, well, let's do 5% the first year and 10% the next year and 15% the next year and just keep hammering time and time again. We don't know what's going to come. What is inflation going to continue? What's in that? In hindsight, if I could redo this whole thing, for the past 30 years, TUD should have charged 2% per year. And we would be just where we need to be. But prior boards said, no, I'm not going to raise rates. I'm going to spend your reserves. I'm going to kick the can down the road so your children are going to pay for this. If you look back over the last 3 years, there isn't a single bill that didn't go up. And that's shameful. It's inflation, it's everything else. But guess what we had to do? We made do without. So my real concern here is, yes, it's steep, but this was designed to have that $18 hit the first year. And then the next years, you can be assured that your hit's going to be dollars, 2%, 1%, and doing that versus other direction. Now, if we decided, the board told us to go forth with that. If the board had told us, no, we want it flat, 7% per year. If the last 3 years we had already had this increase, we were supposed to do it in 2020, and guess what? COVID hit. My scare as a finance director is, what's that tank going to be 3 years from now? You know, you say spread it out here. This rate increase is not designed to do a brand new bunch of CIP. This is CIP that's fallen down that we need to do right now. We've made tremendous project. That 2015 rate increase that all this ratepayers shared in and everything else contributed about $40 million worth of improvements. We also are got $22 million of grants. We're doing everything we can with that. The past 30 years, TUD's had 100 million of necessary improvements. None of these improvements are to do a ping pong court out here or something like that. These are critical. And my concern, what I said earlier in here, is that I'm afraid if you defer right now, all of us are going to pay more later. You know, your idea of taking this and spreading it out over 10 years, well, every year something come up. Well, it's Friday, you found out 3 tanks that we weren't even on our list to be replaced. So I just think it's important that you realize the percentage in doing that. And that's like I said, we can't change and just say, well, let's take the 28 and spread it out over the next years. Right now, we have a deficit of $500,000 a month. So you can talk about your bills and what you can't afford and everything else, but right now with our existing rates, $500,000 a month. And so we're going to have to cut. Back in 2014-15, we cut a lot. We went 0 CIP for several years. Guess what? It costs the ratepayers millions because it keeps going up. You know, that plant you bid out at 20 million, it's now 40 million. Do you think any of those are going to go down? And like you said, rates don't go down, but hopefully electricity, gas, chemicals, health insurance doesn't go up more than 36%. So anyway, thank you for letting me clarify.
You know, I have a hard time understanding how we call it a $500,000 a month deficit when the first question asked was, do we have a balanced operations maintenance budget?
We have a balanced budget because we cut $6 million of needed CIP. That budget should include that $6 million to continue to do service like we did. So we cut next year's budget you just adopted is with 62% of the planned board adopted CIP gone. Not going to do it unless it's grant funded. That's how we do that. And that's how you come up with the $500,000 a month. We don't do the CIP, you're right. We don't have that deficit, but it'll cost us tens, if not hundreds of millions in the long.
I agree. To adopt a 0 increase is, you know, not in this board's best interest, TUD's best interest, or the public. But, you know, there again, things are going to come up. Things, you know, fluid change. These 3 tanks, you know, suddenly come up in the last couple of weeks. You know, it was just, I don't think, you know, they've worked themselves into that position. You know, I would be curious to see what the, you know, previous 5-year cleaning cycle, you know, what that inspection looked like versus, you know, the brand new one that, you know, puts them in a critical list versus, you know, being, okay, you know, they're good to go for another 5 years. But, you know, that just leads us back to the same thing of, you know, cost increase so substantial when it's based in time. You know, doing this stuff in 10 years versus 5 years, it's into perpetuity, you know, and getting back to, you know, raising rates at a reasonable amount, you know, to, you know, anywhere from 1.5% to 3.5% on an annual basis. You know, I've been in meetings where it's been mentioned before. Hey, you know, we should have started this at 2% 30 years ago. We wouldn't have to, you know, be a whole lot different. But, you know, like I said, this 18% is actually even above what I, you know, proposed last week in my amendment. And, you know, like I said, I'm not, it's too much of a burden. for too many people. Thank
President
you,
Kearns,
President Kearns.
if you don't mind, could I just, President Kearns,
Go ahead.
real quick. As your district engineer, and hearing you speak a little bit, Director Boatright, it sounds somewhat like there's a fundamental disagreement about CIP and the need for CIP. Not in the sense that we don't have things that are ready to fall down, but in the timescale. And as Dawn explained, I think it would be great. I know some of you have been out and seen our infrastructure. Maybe we don't do a great job communicating with the public. In a perfect world, we wouldn't air all of our needs out to the public. In a perfect world, the public would turn the tap on, they get water, they flush the toilet. They don't think twice about TUD. It's a consistent, reliable service. Unfortunately, we do have tanks ready to fall down. We have tanks, like Don said, he's been up on every tank. He can't even get on a lot of those tanks now because it's not safe. The real question here is, do we defer CIP? I mean, that's what this slide is about. Do we defer CIP at a greater cost to future generations? These items on here, I mean, these projects are, you just have to take my word for it. And if you don't want to, that's fine. They're in horrific condition. And I think you do know that. Question is, how far can we defer these? In a perfect world, we would take every asset right up to its point of failure and replace it. We don't live in a perfect world. I mean, like, I wish I could run all the tires on my car right down to the tread is at the bare minimum and then change them. That's just not the way public agencies can operate. And the problem is when a tank fails and we have to go back, it's more expensive. We've seen costs for pipeline go from about $1 million a mile in roadway to $1.5 million. We've seen that in like 3 years. We've seen tanks go from what was just a few years ago about $1 a gallon to $2 a gallon. These aren't costs that the district controls. These aren't things that we can make efficiency improvements on and somehow avoid these costs. These are liabilities. They're either going to be paid for as quickly as possible so that we prepare ourselves for future generations with lesser rate increases, or they're going to be deferred now and paid for later. And I think the board has the information to make an informed decision. You guys have the toughest decisions to make right now. I mean, I don't envy your position. The last time a board had to confront rate increase was 8 years ago. The world has totally changed in 8 years. It's totally changed in 3 years, quite honestly. And I do have compassion for those that have, fixed income. It's really about food, shelter, fuel, and utilities. I mean, those are the fundamentals you need to really survive. Obviously, there's healthcare and other things, but all of those have gone up with the exception of water in the last 3 years, all of them. So I think what we're asking for is reasonable, but I welcome the opportunity to really show you how poor the infrastructure is, and you can drive our roads, you can see how it is for the county. Well, what's in the ground isn't really much different than what you see on the road surface. So the difference is you can still drive on a bumpy road. You can't get water out of a pipe that's completely ruptured. And so we're just asking that you consider this from the CIP perspective. How we defer these costs is just going to impact, the next board is going to have to make those tough decisions.
Director Balin? You're done, Director Boatright, correct?
For now.
Yeah.
I have a question for Jesse Martin. And can you look at in your clientele and tell me how frequent it is for boards to pass a 218 1 year at a time, or just have a 1 year or 2 year rate increase. It doesn't mean this is how I feel. I'm just wanting some information. Thank you.
Of course, thank you, Director Balin. Other clients, it runs. The direct answer to your question is I have no clients, none, that do a new 218 every year. It's expensive to prepare the cost of service study. Steve was able to prepare it. Staff was able to prepare it in-house, but some of my clients do not have that luxury. And so they go out, they hire a consultant for it, which can be incredibly expensive, and to go through not just the preparation of the report, but also the notice, the public hearing, having somebody available to count the ballots. All of that is very expensive and time consuming. And so all of my other clients do it on 5-year intervals. And I have numerous clients going through it right now. TUD is probably, what is this, June? It's the 3rd or 4th one this year, and I did several last year. So it is, I think it's a sign of the times that many of my clients have noticed a hike in costs and a decline in revenues. And so they all went out for Prop 218s, and all of them up until this date have been 5-year increases. And I hope that directly answers your question, but if there was something else you wanted me to answer, please elaborate.
Yes, it answers my question. Thank you. And I understand that Prop 218 is for a cost of service. However, I have received phone calls, and I think it's important to at least register in public that there are points that are germane to this, even though we are talking about a cost of service and it's based on the rising costs of doing business, wages and benefits and materials and so forth. But there are points I think that the public is making to this board that we can't ignore. And we've heard some of it again today. And again, today's cost of service, however, I've been hearing from folks that would like us at some point to talk about a tier that is just for folks lower than the 300 cubic feet or 400 cubic feet a month. I have heard that. Okay. There's an interest in trying to create a tier for low water users. There's also the need, I have heard, to revisit how non-potable water, raw water cost of service is calculated. And that would be the cost of raw water delivery. Maybe you call it, Dawn, a rate study, but I'm just kind of hearing a nuance to this a little bit, how this is, how do we arrive at that, including the value of green protection zones, fire flow, those have value. Past improvements that our ranching community, farming community, neighbors have done has value. I would like to see that revisited, to just have a discussion on that, the cost of raw water delivery and the value of that water to, as one of our folks said in the audience, to the entire community. It is difficult for me to just listen in isolation about cost of service. I see the need is great, but I also feel it is this board's job to have a larger conversation about, let's say, leveraging this money. We have a social contract, if we get this money, to have a transparency in how we have beat the bushes to offset this cost with as much other people's money coming in as possible. You know, we don't know what I'll just stick to this. So to me, it's difficult to excise this conversation about a percentage for the first year. I understand it. Talking to me about it or persuading me doesn't really help. I mean, it's valuable for the public record, but I'm weighing things differently in my mind as a director because of the people I work for. I am a ditch customer, okay? I don't want to make this personal. I see the level of the water quality going down. Okay, I understand that I am making a decision for the good of the whole here. Director Ringen has said this is going to hit him in the pocketbook. You have said we just need to do this. It is personal for a lot of us. I'm trying to set that aside, but I also can't just make a decision in a vacuum. We may not get everything we want. But I would also, and I'll just wrap this up, before next year and before the board then at that time approves that incremental increase for the second year, I do think that we need to explore a tier for lower water users, really do. In committee, I don't care, but we need to just revisit that. And we need to explore, I would say, explore leveraging or diversifying our revenue portfolio. And even if we need to task employees to beat the bushes for more money out there, which apparently there could be, we just really have to explore it. I know we don't have a grant writer on hand. I know we have NEPA. I know we have all these other competing needs. I get it. But still, I think that in the interest of transparency, some folks have called it cost-cutting measures, but I would like to expand it to exploring. We've talked about this diversification of revenues if we can, or at least have the board engaged in something like that. And then explore, the third thing is the non-potable raw water delivery costs, including the benefits and services. And we can throw in flood control too, because the ditch provides that for the whole county as well. So that is what I would like this board to, and everybody, have a robust discussion on in this coming year before we approve any more scheduled increases as part of that decision-making process.
Any other comments? I'll just, I do have one comment regarding Director Balin's mention there of that 400 cubic feet per household. It's been my experience, and I don't know if staff can chime in on this or not, but that's pretty much, for lack of a better term, the industry standard for a month's use in a household. And I know there's always exceptions to the rule. There's always going to be some folks that use less, but there's going to be a lot more use a lot more. So my point is, I think if you did that, it's just my opinion, you'd be lowering it for a very small percentage of the ratepayer, and you'd be raising it for a greater portion of the ratepayer. Just my opinion, just thoughts on that. I don't even know if that's true, but I can say that 400 cubic feet per customer per month is pretty much an industry standard. So right or wrong. Okay. Anybody else have any comments, motion? What's the feeling of the board here? Director Jacobs.
Thank you. I'd like to, Don, I wonder if you could respond directly to the CIP projects that are related to the ditch. That seems to be of vital importance to a number of people. So maybe drill into
Boy, I wish Eric called.
specifically the ditch related CIPs.
Sure, I'll try to, it's so busy of a thing here, but without seeing them, I know there are two chute flumes, the Minor Shack chute flume and the Bo Leonard chute flume. Now, I'm elaborating. I just happened to ask one of the superintendents about one of those, the Minor Shack chute flume projects. What's that entail? And he says to me, well, right now we're trying to decide how many helicopter flights it's going to take to get the equipment where it needs them. Huh? We don't use helicopters in that fashion. We've used helicopters when several hundred feet of the Columbia Ditch slid off the mountain in the middle of the night, and we use helicopters to fly equipment and people into that region to fix it. But we've never used helicopters, to my knowledge, to fly. Anyway, just all that. You know how expensive a helicopter flight is, so I think that's interesting. Oh, number 123, the Shaw's Flat Pipeline in Sullivan Creek. Right, so that sends water out of Phoenix Lake and downstream to both treated water users and raw water customers, to the tune of 10,000 people will rely on. That's in jeopardy. This last series of storms really hammered on that system. We don't think it's going to fall down tomorrow, but we do need to address it. So there's a project.
Don, I can elaborate.
Thank you.
If it's good. Time.
Yes, please.
So there are a number of projects in the 5-year schedule, and I won't be able to list them quite with as much detail, but let me give you an example of one that I'm aware of that's on there. And that is, if you've ever walked out of Columbia College and they have kind of an exercise route and you can walk along the ditch there. There's a portion of that is seriously incised, very eroded. It's a really steep cliff, basically right up next to the ditch. It's been eroding over time. It's a vulnerability. A project like that, it's identified for design and permitting and that sort of thing in our 5-year schedule, easily over $1 million. Now, let me give you an example for context. $1 million investment in that one project that doesn't feed any treatment plants. So that doesn't benefit any treated water customers. We have about 600 raw water customers, okay? So just back to the envelope math, $1 million, 600 customers over a 5-year period, you'd have to collect $30 a month on top of the base charge for each raw water customer, just for that one project. And there's many more. It's not, though the CIP is heavily weighted on water distribution, tanks and the like, but it doesn't take very many projects downstream of treatment plants on our raw water system to quickly show that the economics for raw water is challenging. We have to raise quite a bit of funds to just do that one project.
Just some additional background information for you, Director Jacobs, that, you know, a lot of times when we're talking about raw water customers, they're not the biggest projects. A lot of it is, you know, PG&E now is doing a ditch outage on their ditch, which affects our ditches twice a year. And during that time period, there's extensive costs from notifying customers, from repairs, maintenance, everything else, turn-ons, turn-offs, and everything else. So, you know, the ditches, it's really the operational standpoint. And, you know, I empathize when people stand up and say it's gone up 300% or whatever else, but part of, in the old days, they weren't charged on a monthly basis. They were only charged when they were getting water. Makes sense, right? But we don't pay for that water. We pay for the guy who's out digging the ditch every day, turning on your meter, checking it, replacing your reclamation system, whatever. So we have tremendous operating costs. This last year with atmospheric rivers and the snow, we had all hands on deck trying to keep those ditches flowing and not flooding out people's homes up there. So yes, the CIP is a component of that, but when we talk about the cost of services, that CIP can go up and down dramatically over the years. And that's where when we don't have reserves, it really hurts us. And, you know, it's still a matter of we track the cost, we analyze the cost. Like Eric said, 60% of it goes to our treatment plants. So none of that's in the cost of services study for the raw water customers. But it's still, none of the rates are enough, you know, whether it's raw or treated. And I empathize with Director Balin. I think by all means, there's different ways to look at it and doing that. And that's something that should be looked at. But for right now, I think, you know, the decision is, do we wait to do that right now? Or do we do something right now as far as what's before us? And also, Director Balin has a good point about what other districts are doing. I've been doing this a long time. And historically, the 5-year window, somebody else asked me the other day, why do you do 5 years? Prop 218 specifically says the maximum number of years you can do is 5. I know I do 10 for 2% a year and everything else. Maximum is 5 years. So everybody, ever since 218 came out, has done 5 years at a time because it's expensive. The big districts for the past 5 years have gone to analyzing it annually, and many of them are doing it for free. My fear here is that if we go with what's proposed or a temporary thing, we're gonna have to do it again. And we may need to anyway. Who knows? There's uncertainty 3-4 years from now, what's gonna come back or where we're gonna be. But anyway, I hope that helps.
Okay, just continue with what I wanted to say. So as I had some time to study and look at this a little closer, there's a couple that I want to mention. Number 112, the Tuolumne Main Canal Bypass Alternatives Analysis. So we've known for now hundreds of years that our water supply is vulnerable to mudslides, fires, and things of that nature, right? My opinion, it's inappropriate. It's not doing my job if I don't figure out a way, for us to figure out a way to mitigate or prevent that to the degree we can.
Excuse me, General Manager John, could we bring that up on the screen, what you're reading from?
Yeah, bring up either one of them.
We're done.
So for those who don't know, PG&E owns and operates part of our water supply, our infrastructure. I'm referring to the 5 or 7 miles of flumes and ditches and canals that conveys the water from Lyons across the canyon to section 4 above Trainard. That is owned and operated by PG&E. It's wooden. It's in a high fire hazard that can be debatable, I suppose. Hasn't burned in all these years, but we feel like we know that is in jeopardy. It seems irresponsible for decades and decades and decades not to take the time to look at that, to mitigate that, because if I'm wrong and the flume never burns, yay us. If the flume does burn, and I mean catastrophic, I'm the worst case scenario, this county's, I know this sounds like speculation, but this is what I have to worry about. So anyway, that's a newcomer to the CIP, is to study this thing and maybe get a partner in PG&E or others to help us with that project. I want to also mention, oh yeah, this is a newcomer, Director Ringen. You've been tapping on my chest a few times about this. Number 152, Phoenix Lake Sediment Disposal Area land acquisition. So there's a potential, money pending, that we could purchase some land and own land so we can dispose of Phoenix Lake sediment for years to come. Those are some examples.
Thank you.
Other examples.
Director Boatright.
President Kearns, I get it. Don, have we ever approached PG&E, in a one-on-one meeting for the main canal bypass as to, we definitely know it would take some time to replace the wooden flumes, but would they participate or actually do and manage, temporary bypass as far as a partnership with them to have that conversation with them?
Right. And so the short answer is yes. The interesting answer is, this opportunity came up because the county is currently in a hazard. What do we call this, Emily? Anyway, disaster declaration. TUD has the opportunity to put in for some funding for hazard mitigation projects. One of them is to put a 20 acre foot reservoir on the side of the flumes. Another one is to analyze the alternatives to the canal. So I called Mike Schoner, I said, hey, from PG&E, I said, hey, any chance, and he chuckled. I said, any chance you'd want to, partner or somehow, be involved with this? He chuckled. He says, well, you're about the 5th general manager says the very same thing to me. What I'm waiting for is for a real proposal from you. So yes. And he's going to talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, what's the pleasure of the board? Anybody have a Director Ringen?
I make a motion that we go ahead and pass the original 218 plan.
The original 28%?
Yes.
Procedure question on that? To revisit, and I understand Directors Ringen to want to do that. To revisit his or mine motion from the previous meeting, do we need to vote to revote on that? Or to bring it back up again? Or is it, basically to revisit it? Or repropose an amendment, Jesse?
Yeah, Jesse, do you have a comment on that, please?
I do. Thank you, Director Boatright, President Kearns. Yes, because this is a continued meeting, all of the motions that were previously made yet failed to garner a second or failed to garner a vote need to be, if somebody would like to reintroduce that motion, such as Director Ringen's, the first step is for Director Ringen to move for a reconsideration of his original motion. And so then if that motion to reconsider gets a second, the President Kearns will call for a vote. If it collects 3 or more votes, then the subsequent motion by Director Ringen will be, I move to adopt the rates as proposed in the original rates schedule study. Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess I need to make a motion to reconsider the motion from the 14th.
I'll second that.
Okay. Under discussion, anybody have any comments? I might have some comments. Go ahead.
Clarification, could we get not the motion, Director Ringen, could you state that your amendment or motion is for the full rate increase?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Hey, Dawn, I want to hear a comment about those Mono Village tanks that you just had inspected. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Okay, well, for everybody, if you don't know, this is the time of year when we begin to dive, clean, and inspect our tanks with an outside contractor, licensed professional. The 10 state standards suggest you should do this between every 3 and 5 years. Well, we chose 5 years because at 78 tanks or 80 tanks at the time, way too much money per year to do this. So we do this every 5 years. Anyway, I think now we're probably inspecting around 10 to 12 tanks per year. This is the time of year we do that. We usually get reports in a few months. But because of the nature of this discussions of last week, the superintendent wanted to tell me that the divers were in one of the Mono Village tanks. They were going to look at all 3 of them, but one of them, they had to abort mission. There were rafters down and the tank is unsafe to go for them to go in there and clean and inspect. Well, when are we going to hear about the other ones? Well, in a couple of days. 2 days later, maybe 3 days later, the report back is all 3 of the tanks are compromised. Is that what you want to hear from me? And then subsequently, it's now on our CIP.
It's now on your CIP.
Yeah. Last minute, this is the thing about our CIP and our budget. It's the best plan we have at the moment, right? With everything we know, but without failure, for me anyway, the moment we adopt the CIP and a budget, something happens, whether it's courts, well failures all over the county, and the TUD's asked to help with the county partnership to extend main line. So things just changed. So anyway, it just changed and we added it to the CIP.
Okay, any other questions?
I have a follow-up question to your question.
Sure, go ahead.
So, General Manager Don, what would be the impact of a catastrophic failure of one of those 3 tanks?
I just got to tell you, this just makes me sick to my stomach, but these 3 tanks are at the top of hills where all of our tanks are on top of hills. In a lot of cases, many cases, they are in neighborhood houses within 10 to 12 feet of tanks. In this particular case, these tanks are on top of a hill of a shared driveway, and there's house is just down the road, 70 feet, 80 feet away. So, I mean, it's obvious. It's, if there's a sudden catastrophic failure, there's going to be some damages. Hopefully nobody gets hurt, but there'll be some damages downstream.
And just, I believe we had a failure of a tank recently. Could you tell us about that?
Right, it's well documented. Couple Januaries ago, I forget. I feel like it was anyway. A couple of years ago, we call them the Zone 3 tank off Michigan Drive in the Lakewood area. A tank very similar to this, surrounded by homes on top of a hill, ruptured. It caused severe damage to the house closest to it, and damaged 3 or 4 other homes to lesser degrees, not to mention some vehicles that were hit. Fortunately, it was early in the morning. The house that was damaged the most, the gentleman had just left for work, and his family was inside the house and were unharmed.
Thank you.
Any other comments before we call for the vote? Director Boatright?
President Kearns, I just want to make clear for myself, this is a vote for reintroduction of a motion for the full rate increase.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
So
Director Jacobs?
just to clarify my understanding, we're not voting on the rate increase. We're voting on a motion to reconsider the motion that was made last meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm getting a thumbs up from Jesse here.
So we're not making a decision on the rate increase. We're making a decision to reconsider a motion that was made last meeting.
Correct. Okay, any other comments? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, 3-2, it passes the reconsideration.
Roll call.
Sure. Are you going to call the names? You want me to? Okay.
Director Balin,
No.
Director Boatright,
No.
Director Jacobs,
Yes.
Director Kearns.
Yes.
Director Ringen,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay. So Jesse, we're right back to where we were 2 weeks ago, correct?
Correct. Right back
Okay.
to square one.
Director Ringen?
Okay, I want to make a motion that we pass the rate increase with the original 218 parameters.
Is there a second for that?
Like some discussion?
If we get a second first, then we can discuss it.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded by Director Ringen and Director Jacobs. You had a comment, Director Jacobs?
Just a brief comment. My understanding, Steve, if we decide to have a lesser amount than the proposed, we're going to be in the we'll be in the deficit. And if it's the number that you suggested, or one alternative, the deficit would be $10 million. Is that correct? My understanding?
So as presented in the rate study, and that based on the projected cost and the rate study, the proposed rates should cover us for the 5 years. Anything less than that will create a deficit, but the deficit then will basically come out of CIP to compensate for that. So if what we presented today, if that was the option, the lesser amount of 18% versus 28%, the projected deficit coming out of CIP would be approximately almost $10 million over the next 5 years.
So assuming, well, let's say if that happens, we were to approve a lesser amount than what you've recommended, the impact of that would be we're running in the red. we have to reduce CIP or defer CIP, which could result in catastrophic failure of the ditch, of a tank, and which would impact everybody, raw water and treated water and the entire
You know, to clarify, the board did adopt a budget with an already reduced CIP. So any increase we've talked about, I said this 2 weeks ago, and I'll reemphasize, if we do have an increase that is enacted, that money would go to restore CIP.
Correct.
So if it was the full 28%, we'd be back on the board adopted CIP as scheduled. If it was something less, then there'd be a lesser amount, but that would go completely to, we'd maintain the lower operations and maintenance budget, but we would put those additional funds into CIP. As far as potential failure and that sort of thing, I mean, that's a risk we have on a daily basis. And, you know, we have extensive insurance to help with claims against people, but, you know, first and foremost is customer service, safety, no one getting hurt, doing that sort of thing. So, you know, there's two sides to not doing CIP. One is the risk of failure and bigger liabilities, somebody getting hurt. The other one is that it's going to cost more 2 years from now than it did now. So we try and get as much done as we can. I think we've shown that with the last rate increase, but I hope that clarifies.
Thank you.
Just a comment too, Steve, or actually a question. So the deficit you mentioned, that's just to piggyback on Director Jacobs. The deficit would be if we pass something less and spent on the CIP as proposed and not throttle it back, correct?
That what we did in the rate study, if you recall, the specific CIP was $38 million over the next 5 years. And some of it was 9 million this year, 6 million next year, 5 million, whatever. For purposes of the rate study and this proposal, we averaged it out. So it's like an average of $6.5 million each year over those years. So that's where that would come in to play. If we did a lesser amount, how much are we going to get, and then projecting it forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Director Boatright? Looked like you were going to ask a question.
I have no other comments at this point.
Okay. Director Balin?
I just have a question to clarify the process, because we're voting to reconsider what we had proposed or made a motion for last time. So that would mean that Director Boatright could reintroduce consideration of his previous motion or not?
Not at this time, Director Bailey. Right now, there's a motion and a second on the floor waiting for a vote.
I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that. But in the interest of process, if this one that was on the table right now died for lack of three, you could, that previous one could be reintroduced for consideration. Jesse, could you answer that?
The answer is yes, Director Balin.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Director Boatright can move to reconsider his original motion as well. Yes.
In addition to the new one that's on the table, the 18%.
Yes, that's Director Ringen's motion. Right, the 28%.
No, excuse me, 18%. The one that Steve showed us a PowerPoint on.
Yes, the 18%. So far, I am unaware. I do not recall a motion being made specifically on the 18% last meeting 2 weeks ago. So that may be a fresh motion. I recall Director Boatright's motion from 2 weeks ago also included a change to the sewer rates, if I recall correctly. And so that's a unique motion on itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And just to be clear, this motion is on the original 218, 28% that Director Ringen just made on, and Director Jacobs seconded. There is no motion for the 18% currently. Okay.
And my understanding there cannot be another motion until this one is voted on.
Jesse?
You can. Yeah. After a motion and a second, you can. You can do it in the precise way to handle competing motions is that the later motion goes first. So if Director Boatwright were to make a motion to reconsider his motion from 2 weeks ago, and he would have to articulate it. I don't remember the details of it precisely. He would have to articulate that. He could make that motion to reconsider now, and then we would have to have a vote on Director Boatwright's motion first. Or Director Boatwright or any other director, frankly, could make a new motion to adopt an 18% increase at this point, and that would take precedence over Director Ringen's motion to vote on the rate schedule as proposed. That includes a 28% increase in the first year. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I don't think it, which motion and second would be voted on first? That would be Director Ringen's at this point, correct?
No, it's the second motion goes first. The second new motion, it goes in reverse order.
If I understand this correctly, President Kearns, I would like to make a competitive motion for a reduced rate increase on the water to 14%. The first year. And the sewer side, 1/2 of the percentage rate the first year and 1/2 the percentage rate for the second year. All subsequent rate increases as per the original would stay in effect. Yeah, I don't know how to end it.
Okay. All right. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second it. I'll second it.
Okay, so we have two motions now. So we're going to take up I'm open for discussion, Director Boatwright's motion here. And is there any comments on that? Steve?
I mentioned it earlier, but I think important to put into context, reducing the first 2 years of sewer has been calculated. Projected deficit of $6.6 million over the next 5 years, on top of the 10 million shown.
Okay. Is there any more comment on Director Boatwright's motion? Director Jacobs.
Just a question. If we reduce the first year increase to 14% as opposed to the 18% that you presented earlier, what would be the impact?
Yeah, the additional 14% would also bring in several $1 million of additional deficit for water. What you were presented with was the 18%. Thank you.
So do we have I don't want to, I realize I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have a rough idea what the 14%?
Yes,
Impact of the 14% versus the 18% that you talked about earlier?
I got you, Steve.
You got it.
$15.7 million.
So that would be 15.7 in addition to the 6.6 million on the sewer. So that would be a total deficit of 21 million plus. Okay, so the impact of the motion that we're considering would be to increase the deficit to 21 million, approximately 21 million. Thank you.
Director Boatwright.
Comment. Steve, would we develop or build the 21 point whatever $1 million in years 6 to 10 on that rate increase? And would that money still come in years 6 to 10?
When you say the money comes in, it would take us until year 6. We would never recover the 21 million. In year 6 forward, we would be breaking even based on the projection as of now. If inflation was higher, anything else was higher, that would continue to raise.
So
But the projected deficit, anything we reduced in the upfront is essentially lost forever. And then we would slowly continue to lose each year for the lesser amount. And then in year 6, we would be approaching back to break even versus the proposal before you has us riding the ship in the first year, continuing to operate as normal and sufficient funds to get us through the first 5 years.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be years 6 to 10 beyond our current rate increase? We would be subject to whatever the cost of inflation is as the actual deficit?
We would absolutely need to do another rate study before year 6. Whether that changes things, of course.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments regarding Director Boatwright's motion? Okay. Go ahead, Don.
Just again, I know I'm the gentleman, I just. Just to be completely fair to both sides of this, I obviously am advocating for a 28% increase. There's what I think is a generous meeting in the middle, so to speak, of an 18% increase. I have to say that whatever is decided, especially less, we're going to work our tails off to make that money work for us. We're going to work our tails off to make sure we don't have something catastrophic happen. I want you to know we're not going to sit back and someday say, I told you so. That is just not going to happen. Okay, I'm going to go to work for you. We're all going to go to work for you no matter what you decide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call for the vote then on Director Boatwright's message or motion of the, for lack of better terms, we'll call it the 14% increase.
That's fine.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No.
Nay.
No,
Motion fails 2-3. Sure, go ahead.
Director Balin,
No, I mean, yes.
Director Boatright,
Aye.
Director Jacobs,
No.
Director Kearns,
No.
Director Ringen,
no,
Okay, which brings us back to Director Ringen's motion. Director Balin, I saw you reaching for your microphone. Did you have a comment?
No.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments on Director Ringen's motion to accept the full 28% as went out in the mailer?
I've got a question.
Sure.
I was curious. I know we've had a lot of folks speak about the raw water users, and I want to thank you for your input and your suggestions. And they're important. I think they should be heard. And I would recommend when there's an opportunity to do when there's opportunity, I'm not sure what the venue would be for that. Obviously, there's some feelings that the rate increases for ag customers, in particular raw water customers in general, is unequitable or unfair. And I would appreciate, I would like to know what you would feel would be the right thing to do. I want to do the right thing. I know all of us do. But I would like to solicit your input so that we can come up with a rate structure that you say, yeah, this is fair. I'm a businessman. You're running a business. We want to carry our own weight. We want to do the right thing, not just for ourselves, but what's best for the entire district. So I would just like to offer that. Also, I was just curious. I wonder if we could, I know there were some votes in protest of the rate increase, and some of those included raw water customers. Could we maybe visit the numbers of the total number of raw water increase, or excuse me, the total number of raw water ratepayers and the number of protests that we received?
Jesse can help me with this if need be, but for us, the Prop 218 process is to ensure that a notice is provided to every TUD customer, whether they are water only, sewer only, water and sewer both, raw or treated. So that letter went out to all of them. We do not separate, nor do we bill by class. When we received the 218, we again do not separate by class or anything of that. And the total votes reported to you were by water and sewer. We don't readily have those numbers available. As far as that, I can tell you right now, we have 589 sewer customers. As I showed you, excuse me, thank you, 589 raw water customers. As I showed you in the earlier slides here for water, 94% of our connections did not protest. So the specific numbers of raw water in there, again, that's not how they're tabulated or reported. So.
Okay. Don, could you amplify maybe?
Well, yeah, I looked into this after a couple weeks ago, and I feel like the number 17, we received 17 raw water customers protest.
Out
I
of
could be wrong.
17 out of how many?
500, almost 600, 587, 597.
Okay, yeah, because I know that in all 17 that protested, every one of those is valuable and it needs to be heard and needs to be, we need to understand why the protest was there and we need to rectify anything that needs to be rectified. So, but just looking at the numbers, 17 out of how many?
Now, let me clarify too, because, excuse me?
The entire time, somebody said it off. Go ahead, I know how to operate the business. You guys have been lobbying pay rate as
Go ahead, Steve.
First of all, my role was to prepare a rate study, provide that to board, direction. That's what I'm providing. Lobbying has nothing to do. This rate study, this increase is what is the best interest for our ratepayers, for our community, for our employees, everyone included. When Don speaks of 17, prior to us going into that meeting, we did track by account number out of the 836 protests we received, 17 were raw water customers. The 30 people who are here in the room brought in approximately 47 protests. Those were added to the water number. We have not gone through to verify or see what class those 47. So potentially the 17 plus the 47 we received could be added to that. But important to note too, if we bring this up, this is the first year I'm aware of, we were on track to have less than 200 protests received. The Farm Bureau took it on themselves to do a mass mailing to all customers, generated a letter stating why you should protest, provided a form, provided a returned envelope. In the next week, we received 600 protests on those forms. They took them out in the community, and they're certainly entitled to do this, took them out in the community and asked people to vote against it. They delivered them to people in Groveland. They're not eligible to vote on it. But we went from 200 to 800, even after that effort there. But if you're specifically looking for a number of protests, again, understand what the concern is that they should be treated as separate class so they can do it. 588 votes. If we'd had this, they would have voted against it. They'd have a majority, and we'd never have a rate increase for the raw water customers. Concern with the raw water customers need to pay their fair share. The laws of California say water customers need to pay their fair share, whether they're raw, treated, commercial, ag, whatever. They need to pay their fair share. I would invite a consultant to come in and do that, but I warn you, be careful what you ask for. Because as it stands right now, I am not sure they're paying their fair share. None of our customers are paying their fair share with these deficits. Now, if we can find ways to cut costs, if we can find the ways to only deliver water during the winter or summer and not the rest of the year and all that maintenance, whether we pipe it, we hand carry it, I don't know. I would invite that. I think we should, but this idea of having the 589 have separate voting, of course, they'll vote down every rate increase. Nobody wants a rate increase, but unfortunately, just like everything else, the prices go up. So I think we're way off track here with the 218s and the protest. We have all the protests. The board's welcome to see them if they like them in there. But again, the vast majority is just a form. Check here. I protest both water and sewer, no matter what customers they were. We received them from sewer only customers, water only customers. Again, once we did it. So prior to the meeting, there were 17 Farm Bureau protests. During that meeting, we could potentially have 47, but I don't think it's that high.
Okay, so the 17 compared to what? What's the total number of raw water?
589 raw water.
Okay, so 17 out of 589.
Yep.
Okay, so, but even if there's just one, it's important. Even if it's just one protest, it's important. So we.
Yeah, they're paying $9 a month instead of 14. So
Go ahead, Glenn. You have the floor.
Yes, so what I'm suggesting, so we don't have, legally, we cannot, as I understand it, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, we don't have the luxury or the capability or we can't legally separate out the raw water increase as a separate line item. We have, it's either all water, all sewer. We don't have a choice in the thing that's in front of us. So what, is that correct, Jesse?
Yes, in broad strokes, that is correct. As was pointed out by one of the public commenters there, the Farm Bureau attempted to do just that several years ago in a case in the Imperial Valley, and the Farm Bureau was unsuccessful with that. The court did not agree that that was an appropriate way to class customers.
So the only opportunity that I have as a director to correct any discrepancies or any feeling that you're not being treated fairly, the only recourse I have as a director is to encourage another 218 process to give whatever, to give your give voice to your concerns about the raw water increases. So the motion in front of us, I don't have the ability to respond to your concerns that it's not equitable. So the only way I could do that would be to do another 218 rate process, and then in the meantime getting your feedback and getting your input, saying, hey board, this is what we think is fair, and we can act on that. Thank you.
Director Bailey.
Yes, question for Jesse. Do you have clients? Because I believe I've seen that raw water customers on other budgets from other agencies. Do you have clients that have the raw water broken out separately?
Not for the purposes of a 218.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other comments? I'm going to make a few comments here. I'll tell you, I've gone back and forth on this thing many times, and you're right. I mean, the raw water customers are part of the treated water when it comes to these 218, and that may be wrong, but that's the way it is, and that's the way we have to deal with it. 3 more tanks ready to fail. That's a heavy burden on our shoulders. And I know we didn't like it when the other tank failed last year. And I don't want to be responsible for that. I know that personally myself, and I know you don't, Dawn, and I know staff doesn't. And those of you that are ratepayers don't want to have that happen next door to you either. So we've got heavy responsibility here. So this is a very tough decision. And we've got to do what's right in the long run here. So any other comments here before we call for the vote? Okay, on Director Ringen's motion for the full 28%. All those in favor?
Yay.
Aye.
No.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, you want to call the vote?
Roll call vote. Director Balin,
No.
Director Boatright,
No.
Director Jacobs, Director Kearns,
Yes.
Director Ringen.
Yes.
Motion passes 3-2.
Okay, that's all our business for today.